At the family dinner, I lifted my glass, the clink of crystal sharp in the warm, familiar chaos. That's when I heard it, slicing through the chatter like a blade. Nobody needs your money or you. The words hung in the air, heavier than the roast Mom had just set on the table. My father didn't even glance up, voice steady, final, like he was reading from a list of grievances. The room didn't flinch. My sister's lips curved into a small, knowing smile, as if she'd been waiting for this moment for years. That tiny movement burned hotter than any words my parents could throw. Heat crawled up my neck, but my face stayed calm. My smile was small, measured, my silence sharper than any argument they could make. They thought I'd swallow it as I always had. But sitting there, surrounded by people who only measured me by what I provided, I knew something they didn't. Their downfall had already begun. Grew up in that house believing silence was the price of belonging. My parents never said it outright, but it lived in the pauses between their sentences. Those small, sharp moments where I learned my value came not from who I was, but from what I could give. If my sister forgot her homework, I ran it to school. If Dad needed someone to stay home with Grandpa, I canceled my plans. When my sister's bills piled up after she hit adulthood, somehow they all ended up in my hands too. They called me reliable. I called it servitude. From the outside, our family looked warm, loud, tight-knit, the kind of family people envied. Holiday photos, matching sweaters, Mom's roast in the center of the table like a trophy. People said we were lucky, the kind of luck that photographs well, not the kind that protects you from being invisible in your own home. Grandpa was the only one who ever looked at me and saw me. Samuel, not the utility, not the always there caretaker. I still remember his study, the smell of old leather and tobacco, his hands resting on mine as he said, "Sam, you don't have to carry their world. Only yours matters." After he passed, that room became my sanctuary. I kept the memory, the feeling of someone who truly saw me. I held on to it like a secret armor. Back at the dinner table, the same table I had spent decades setting, clearing, cooking for, I sat between people who had rewritten me in their heads. Not Samuel, the man who built his own life. Not Samuel, who paid his own bills, managed his career, survived. No, they only saw Samuel, the fixer, the always there, the one who covered everything, questioned nothing, complained never. Dad didn't look up when he spoke. Mom kept slicing the ham. My sister nodded slightly, eyes glinting, proud of herself for agreeing with them. I smiled, small, controlled, and, for the first time in years, I let them think they'd won. But the truth was, the game had already changed. Every bill I'd covered, every favor I'd done, every ounce of energy I'd poured into keeping their world afloat had only built my leverage, my quiet power. They had no idea that while they were dismissing me, I was quietly mapping my freedom, my revenge, my life that no one would ever control again. And for the first time in decades, I felt something I hadn't in years, calm. The calm that comes when you know the first move in a game no one else even realizes is being played is already yours. Before I continue, tell, from which place are you watching this story right now? Please subscribe and like the video for motivation. Dinner carried on. The clatter of forks against plates, the hum of conversation, all blending into a background I barely noticed. My father spoke to my sister about her new job, praising her choices while dismissing my achievements as if they were invisible. Every word they threw at her felt like a mirror, reflecting back all the years I had given, all the sacrifices unnoticed. Dinner carried on. The clatter of forks against plates, the hum of conversation, all blending into a background I barely noticed. My father spoke to my sister about her new job, praising her choices while dismissing my achievements as if they were invisible. Every word they threw at her felt like a mirror, reflecting back all the years I had given, all the sacrifices unnoticed. I sipped my water slowly, letting it cool my rising temper. My hands were steady on the table, but my mind was moving faster than it ever had before. Each favor I'd done, each bill I'd quietly covered, each moment of silent compliance, it had built more than resentment. It had built a foundation, and now I realized I had the bricks. My sister glanced at me, her small smirk lingering as if to say, "See, I agree with them. I know my place." And for the first time, I didn't feel compelled to argue. I didn't need to prove myself. Let her play her role. Let them think I was still the one they could manipulate. Mom cut another slice of ham, eyes darting toward me. probably expecting irritation, maybe even tears. Instead, I smiled, again calm, unflinching. My presence alone became my statement. I had learned long ago that the world often underestimates quiet people. Noise may catch attention, but silence builds power. The conversation shifted to family finances, an area I had once silently overseen, making sure everyone else stayed comfortable while I ignored my own needs. My father started in on his subtle hints. Maybe you should save more. Sam, life isn't all about giving. My sister nodded enthusiastically, playing the supportive sibling, the echo of parental approval I'd never earned. I leaned back slightly, pretending casualness, but inside, each word they spoke only confirmed one thing. I had been preparing for this moment without even realizing it. Every reliable one task, every unspoken expectation, every time I swallowed my pride, it wasn't servitude. It was groundwork. By the time dessert came, a quiet chocolate cake Mom had baked, I had made my decision. I would no longer be the silent caretaker, the invisible provider, the man whose worth was measured in bills and errands. They had finally made it clear how little they valued me as a person. That clarity was liberating. I smiled once more, this time with a hint of something sharper underneath, like steel hidden behind glass. They didn't see it yet. They wouldn't see it until the moves I had been planning, quietly, deliberately, all these years, finally came into play. For now, I ate my slice of cake slowly, savoring each bite, each moment. The room buzzed with chatter, but in my mind, everything was still, calm, calculating, waiting. The real power had always been mine. It just took this long for me to recognize it. And as my sister reached for the last slice, her hand brushing mine, I didn't pull away. I let her have it, watching her smug expression. Let her enjoy her tiny victories. The game had just begun, and she didn't, even though we were playing. The days after that dinner were quieter than I expected. The house hummed with the usual rhythm, my sister complaining about small inconveniences, my parents throwing passive remarks, the air thick with expectation, but I felt different. Lighter somehow. The anger that once bubbled under my chest had settled into something sharper. Clarity. I went through my usual routine, but now with a sense of purpose. Paying bills for everyone? Sure, but this time I did it on my terms, not theirs. I started keeping records, tracking every dollar I had poured in and every favor I had silently carried. Not out of bitterness yet, but because I finally understood the value. I brought the leverage I'd never acknowledged. Work became my sanctuary. At the office, I was Samuel the professional, not Samuel the family servant. I started taking on new projects, negotiating harder, earning recognition I'd never received at home. Every success outside the house felt like a small rebellion, a reminder that the world outside, my family saw me clearly, even if my family couldn't at home. The dynamic hadn't changed, at least not visibly. My sister still sided with our parents, nodding at their jabs, laughing at their jokes, the perfect echo of their worldview. My father's dismissals still stung, though less. Mom's glances were sharper, trying to read me, wondering if something had shifted. They couldn't see it yet. They couldn't see the small, deliberate decisions I was making to reclaim my life. I started small, declining a few requests I would have once accepted without question. A grocery run here, an errand there, simple refusals, and yet the ripple was immediate. My sister raised an eyebrow. Dad frowned briefly. Mom's hands paused mid-slice, and I smiled, small, controlled, calculated. Evenings became mine. I spent them building a life outside their expectations. Networking, learning new skills, making plans that didn't involve anyone but me. Each step felt like walking on solid ground for the first time in decades. Each small victory outside the house fed the quiet power growing inside me, and yet the family still saw only the old Samuel, the reliable one, the invisible one. They had no idea the foundation I'd been quietly building, the independence, the foresight, the network of influence that was slowly shifting the balance of power. One evening, my sister mentioned a looming payment she couldn't cover. My father chimed in, not even asking if I wanted to help. I looked at them both, calm, collected, and said nothing. Not out of cruelty, though it might have felt that way, but out of deliberate choice. For the first time, I realized how much control silence could give. It was a small thing, refusing, but it was also a statement. They expected me to jump, to sacrifice yet again, to absorb inconvenience with no acknowledgement. But I didn't, and in that quiet, My quiet rebellion began to take shape. By the time I went to bed that night, I knew this was only the beginning. I wasn't just Samuel, the family's caretaker. I was Samuel, the man who had finally seen the truth and who would act on it. They had written me into a story of servitude. I was about to rewrite the ending. Life at home carried on as if nothing had changed. The same laughter, the same cutting remarks, the same size of my sister when she didn't get her way. But I had changed. Everything I once accepted out of habit or obligation now passed through a filter I had built carefully over the last weeks. What serves me, what strengthens me, what protects my life. Life at home carried on as if nothing had changed. The same laughter, the same cutting remarks, the same size of my sister when she didn't get her way. But I had changed. Everything I once accepted out of habit or obligation now passed through a filter I had built carefully over the last weeks. What serves me, what strengthens me, what protects my life. It started with the small things. I stopped rushing to fix minor crises. The broken printer, the forgotten grocery list, the last-minute errands. They no longer commanded my immediate obedience. My sister's smile faltered once or twice when she realized I wasn't bending to her expectations. My father's voice carried a sharper edge, questioning, probing, testing. But I didn't respond the way I once would. My silence became a shield, and my calm became a weapon. I began investing in myself in ways I'd long neglected. I enrolled in courses to sharpen skills that had been gathering dust, negotiated a raise at work, even started planning trips and experiences that were purely mine. Every achievement, every step forward outside the walls of that house was a declaration: I exist for me, not for anyone else's convenience. My sister, ever eager to align with my parents, tried to draw me into old patterns. "Sam, can you handle this?" she asked one evening, voice dripping with expectation. I smiled, almost indulgent, and said, "I'll think about it." That single line, so simple, carried years of suppressed authority. The pause in her expression, the subtle flicker of surprise, told me everything I needed to know. They had trained me to obey. Now I was teaching them patience. Dinner tables became mine in a new way. I still sat where I had for years, between my sister and my father, but the energy had shifted. They tried their usual digs, comments about money, subtle critiques, reminders of how I had always helped. I let them fall into silence, letting their words linger and echo while I remained untouched. Each verbal jab slid off powerless, because I no longer allowed their opinions to define me. I started making quiet, deliberate changes in how I managed my contributions. No longer automatic, no longer invisible. Every favor came with intention, with boundaries, with recognition of my own life's value. The family may not have understood yet, but the power had shifted, slowly, imperceptibly. The room froze. My sister blinked, confused. My parents stared as if the universe itself had faltered. For the first time in decades, the table was mine. Not because of shouting, not because of anger, but because I had decided I was in control. I could feel the tension, the disbelief, the unspoken questions swirling in the air. Who is this Samuel? My father must have been thinking. Why doesn't he comply anymore? And my sister, so proud to follow their lead for years, could only stare, unsure how to react. I smiled again, quietly, almost imperceptibly. I didn't gloat. I didn't explain. I just existed in my newfound authority, calm as ever. They could see the change, but they didn't understand it yet. And that was exactly how it should be, because for the first time, I realized something fundamental. They had never needed me the way I thought they did. I had only believed they did. And in that belief lay the power to reclaim my life, step by step, moment by moment, until every expectation, every manipulation, every dismissal would no longer hold sway over me. The table was still theirs in appearance, but in reality the rules had shifted, and I finally was the one writing them. Days turned into weeks. But at home, the patterns of expectation persisted. My parents spoke as if nothing had changed. My sister laughed at my jokes with her usual calculated charm, still ready to align with them, still eager to reinforce the old rules. But I had changed. Every interaction was now an exercise in precision, in understanding the value of my presence and the weight of my absence. I began taking deliberate steps to assert myself in ways they could not ignore. I stopped covering her bills automatically, stopped answering calls on demand, Stopped prioritizing their emergencies over my own life. Instead, I started delegating, redirecting, and even politely refusing. Each refusal was a statement, small but unmistakable. I would no longer be the invisible servant. One afternoon, my sister asked me to handle a last-minute expense she couldn't manage. She leaned in, her voice light but expectant. "Sam, can you take care of this? You always do these things so well." I looked at her, calm, measured. The smile I gave was almost indulgent. "Not this time," I said, and left it at that. She blinked, disbelief flashing in her eyes. My parents, hearing the exchange from the other room, paused mid-conversation, unsure how to react. Silence fell heavier than any reprimand could. The table had shifted under my feet and everyone felt it. They were accustomed to compliance. They weren't ready for control, and yet I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in humiliation. Instead, there was clarity, a quiet, deliberate understanding of my own worth. Their opinions no longer dictated my choices. Their needs no longer held sway over my life. For the first time, I was free to prioritize myself without guilt. Started scheduling my own life with intent. Dinner at my parents' house became an event, not a default expectation. Every favor I offered was chosen, not demanded. I planned weekends, trips, even professional ventures, with no regard for the invisible chains that had bound me for years. The family noticed. My sister's passive resistance grew more noticeable, her smiles faltering as the automatic compliance she relied on vanished. At work, my focus sharpened. The energy I had once poured into family crises now fueled promotions, negotiations, and personal projects. Each achievement outside the home was a silent rebuke to the notion that my value depended on their acknowledgement. I was building a life measured by my terms, not theirs, and yet the ultimate power came from subtlety. I didn't confront them directly. I didn't argue. I let the absence of my old self, the one who always complied, always served, speak louder than words. My father's remarks, once cutting and final, now fell flat. Mom's thinly veiled critiques no longer touched me. Even my sister, so eager to mirror their opinions, found herself without a script. One evening, a family meeting was called, something they had done countless times in the past to discuss responsibilities, bills, plans. I listened as they outlined tasks they expected me to handle. And then calmly I asked questions. Deliberate, precise questions about how these expectations aligned with fairness, with contribution, with effort. The room grew tense. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's knife paused mid-slice. My sister shifted in her seat, unsure how to respond. I continued, each word measured, each sentence a statement of principle. I wasn't angry. I wasn't confrontational. I was clear, deliberate, and unmovable. By the time the evening ended, the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. For years I had been the silent laborer of their comfort. Now I was the arbiter of what I would and would not do. They had written me into a story of servitude, and I was rewriting it in real time, one choice at a time. Walking out of the dining room, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: pride in my autonomy, confidence in my boundaries, and a quiet growing power. My sister's smugness, my parents' dismissals, they meant nothing now. The only approval I needed was my own. And as I closed the door behind me, I realized the truth that had always been there but buried under years of compliance. They had never truly needed me. They had only needed my willingness to let them control me. And that willingness was gone. For the first time in my life, I was Samuel, not the caretaker, not the fixer, not the invisible one, just Samuel, and they had no idea what that meant yet. The house felt different now, though outwardly nothing had changed. The same laughter, the same casual jabs, the same sister aligned with parents' smiles. But beneath it all, the energy had shifted. I moved through it like a conductor, subtle, deliberate, and invisible in plain sight. Every action, every decision carried weight. Every choice was mine. I began to restructure how I interacted with the family in ways they wouldn't immediately notice. Tasks I had once absorbed without question, bills, errands, favors, were now managed on my terms. I delegated some, declined others, and redirected the rest. Each refusal, each delay, each carefully measured action was a test, and the results were immediate. My sister's smug confidence started to falter. She would expect me to act, only to find I wasn't moving according to the old script. My father's words, once commanding, now carried uncertainty. My mother's sharp glances betrayed confusion. They had grown used to automatic compliance, and now that pattern had broken. It was subtle, invisible to anyone but me, but I could feel the tension in the room, the silent acknowledgement of change. At work, I doubled down on my professional life, projects, promotions, networking. I poured the energy I had once given my family into building my own empire. Every success was a quiet statement to them. Samuel exists beyond their control. My value was no longer measured in dollars. I covered for my sister or time. I sacrificed for their comfort. It was measured in my achievements, my growth, my independence. And then came the first direct test of my new authority. My sister approached me, feigning urgency over a last-minute expense. "Sam, can you handle this?" she asked, her voice light but laced with expectation. I paused, looked her in the eyes and said simply, "No, this is yours to manage." Her mouth opened slightly, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face. My father, standing nearby, froze mid-step, unsure how to respond. My mother's knife paused mid-slice. Silence filled the room like a tangible presence. No explanations, no apologies, just calm, deliberate authority. For the first time, the room was mine, not because I had shouted, not because I had confronted them with anger, but because I had decided who I would be and refused to be anything else. The invisible weight I had carried for decades, the expectation of servitude, of compliance, of invisibility was gone, and they felt it. I continued my subtle maneuvers over the following days. Family events were now scheduled around my life, not theirs. My time, my energy, my resources, all managed with precision. Every act of self-prioritization was a quiet statement. I am no longer defined by what you want. I am defined by what I choose. The small victories added up. My sister's dependence on me lessened. Not because she understood, but because I refused to enable her any longer. My father's authority in the house felt diminished. Not because I challenged it openly, but because I no longer obeyed it blindly. And my mother? She began to watch ever so slightly, trying to read the new Samuel she could no longer manipulate. And yet, even in the midst of this shift, I remained calm. I smiled, I listened, I observed. The quiet control, the invisible strategy, it was far more powerful than confrontation. Each move was deliberate, each moment calculated. I wasn't punishing them. I was simply choosing myself. Finally and completely, by the end of the week, I realized the full truth. They had built me to serve their convenience, their comfort, their illusion of control, and I had allowed it for decades. But now every choice, every act of refusal, every step I took in my own life was a reclaiming of my world. The dinner table was still theirs in appearance, the laughter still loud, the jabs still aimed, but the control had shifted irrevocably. The Samuel they once dismissed, the invisible caretaker, the always reliable son, they no longer knew him. The man sitting there now was Samuel, seen, respected, untouchable in his own right, and they had no idea what was coming next. Because the real power, the kind that reshapes relationships, doesn't announce itself. It waits, it grows, and it strikes precisely when they think nothing has changed. And that day, that moment was drawing closer. The next family dinner arrived. Just like all the others, with the same chatter, the same clinking of silverware, the same faint tension lurking beneath the laughter. But this time everything was different. The air around me no longer carried obligation or expectation. It carried choice, control, authority. My parents began their usual remarks, the subtle digs, the reminders of all I had done for them, the little ways they had tried to measure my worth. My sister smiled, ready to echo their opinions, to reinforce the narrative of Samuel, the always compliant son. I listened, calm, patient, almost indulgent. And then I spoke. Not with anger, not with confrontation, but with precision. "Everything I've done for this family," I said slowly, letting the weight of the words settle in the room, "I did because I wanted to, not because you demanded it, not because you valued me only when I served you." "That ends now." The room froze. My father's fork hovered midair. My mother's hand trembled slightly over the carving knife. My sister's smug smile faltered, replaced by the tiniest flicker of panic. The control they had always assumed, they no longer held it. "I'm done being invisible," I continued, voice steady, eyes unwavering. "I am done sacrificing my life for the illusion of your comfort. From today forward, Every decision, every moment, belongs to me. Silence. Complete stunned silence. For years they had measured me in dollars, errands, favors. They had assumed I would always comply, always absorb inconvenience, always remain the invisible caretaker. But now, seated calmly at the same table, smiling with the quiet authority I had cultivated over months, I was Samuel, the man they had ignored, underestimated, and dismissed, fully realized. My sister tried to interrupt, tried to argue, to pull me back into the old roles. I shook my head, smiling again, small, controlled, final. She had supported them for years, but their rules no longer applied to me. I rose from the table, placing my glass down with deliberate care. "I love you all," I said simply, "but I'm no longer at your service. I will participate in this family only on my terms." For the first time, my parents looked at me, not the reliable one, not the invisible laborer, not the boy who had carried their world, but Samuel, the man who owned his life, his choices, his power. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Their disbelief, their discomfort, even their silent admiration. It was proof. Proof that the man they had tried to suppress, the son they had dismissed, had finally stepped into his own authority. I smiled, small and controlled, as I walked from the room. Behind me, the table remained. The family still seated, still noisy, still confident in their world, but it was now a world where I dictated the rules. Not them, and that, I knew, was the real victory. Quiet, deliberate, undeniable, Samuel had finally arrived.